Hi, I'm Laura Flanders. Puerto Rico is being strangled with debt. What's the solution? This week on the show, journalist Ed Morales and activist Charles Kahn talk about the roots of the crisis and how a colonial approach to a colonial problem just might not solve it. Later, we visit with the urban bushwomen who are making change through dance, and you'll get a few words from me on Yale's aversion to paying more taxes. Welcome to the Laura Flanders Show, where the people who say it can't be done take a back seat to those who are doing it. 3.5 million Americans in Puerto Rico are in a dire crisis. The island territory is mired in debt and facing imminent default. Media coverage here has mostly blamed the last 20 years, when tax breaks for corporations were rolled back and loans were extended that couldn't be paid. Our next guests say that the roots of Puerto Rico's problems go way deeper than that, to U.S. colonial rule. And if colonialism's at least in part the culprit here, it's pretty ironic that the solutions on offer from Congress these days seem to be so, well, colonial. To talk about that, Charles Kahn. He's the organizing director at the Strong Economy for All Coalition, a coalition of labor unions and community groups fighting for economic equality, equal funding of public schools, and corporate accountability in New York State. He's also a leader of the Hedge Clippers. More about that in a moment. Ed Morales is a journalist who has investigated New York City electoral politics, police brutality, street gangs, grassroots activists, and the Latino arts and music scene. His books include Living in Spanglish and the Latin Beat, From Rumba to Rock. He's also co-directed a documentary called Whose Barrio? And he's currently an adjunct professor at Columbia University's Center for the Study of Ethnicity and Race. Welcome both. Ed, let's start with you. We do hear some pretty scary headlines, but we don't, I think most of us have much of a picture of what is really going on in Puerto Rico. Can you paint a bit of a scene for us?
Sure. I mean, the number that's being bandied about is about $73 billion in debt that Puerto Rico owes. There's a looming healthcare crisis, and about 300,000 people have left Puerto Rico in the last 10 years. There's projections that there may be 600,000 in this decade between 2010 and 2020. Right now, there's a bill in Congress that's supposed to restructure the Puerto Rican debt. Unfortunately, it involves imposing an onerous fiscal oversight board that would be named by Congress and have no Puerto Rican representation. And that's what the bill in Congress is looking for right now.
Do you have a personal connection to all this?
Sure. My parents were born there. My family still, they moved back, so I go 3 or 4 times a year. I have a lot of friends down there. I kind of feel like I'm living in both worlds, actually, and that's been increasing in the last 10 years or so.
Fiscal Oversight Board, where have we heard that before? Detroit?
Yeah,
Flint?
Washington, yeah. The only problem is that the colonial implications are that there's only going to be one person on the board who may be Puerto Rican, because there's only a requirement for one person to actually reside in Puerto Rico out of the 7-person board.
So while we're putting people into the picture here, and we'll come back to this board in a minute, you've talked a lot about numbers, billions, millions. What about people? What's life like for people living in Puerto Rico today?
Well, you know, Puerto Ricans have always been on average much poorer than any other state in the Union. I mean, Puerto Rico is not a state, it's an unincorporated territory. But there were several programs that began in the 1950s to build a small working and middle class in Puerto Rico that created a sense of prosperity that was mainly designed to combat, for public relations reason, the communist revolution, to show that there would be an island in the Caribbean that would be propped up by democracy and capitalism. But the model for the Puerto Rican economy has always been one of capital extraction, where none of the profits were reinvested in the island. And so in 2006, this provision that gave corporations these huge tax breaks to set up businesses in Puerto Rico was discontinued. Actually, it was discontinued in 1996. It was a 10-year phase-out. And by 2006, Puerto Rico went into recession. Now, through all this time, the government continued to borrow just to cover expenses, and so that's how they accumulated.
And is that where the hedge funds came in, Charles?
It is, right? I think a special type of hedge fund, a vulture hedge fund, right, is what they're called by their peers, because
that's what even your friends call
right,
you know.
Right, because they go after countries that have economies that are weak, countries that are going to default on their debt. They buy up the debt for really cheap prices, and then they do everything in their power to make your life a living hell.
Now,
and
people
reap
watching this
huge
in
profits.
countries like Argentina.
Yeah, people in Argentina, people in Greece, they completely understand what's going on. People like Paul Singer, Blue Mountain Capital, lots of other hedge funders. You know, they say that hedge funds own up more than half of all of the $73 billion debt is owned by hedge funds. And what they've done is they've pushed austerity on the Puerto Rican people to try and reap profits that, you know, range anywhere from 200% profit to 800% profit.
Now, I've seen a lot of coverage that kind of repeats some of the language of the 2008 capitalist crisis here in the United States that says, you know, all these people went into loans that weren't forced on them. They didn't have to sign on the dotted line. Isn't this Puerto Rico's fault for signing up with the vultures?
I mean, I think as Ed, you know, explained, you know, Puerto Rico, because of American laws, was set up almost for failure, right? And they were put in a very difficult position, and they took loans because they needed to provide basic services for their people. And what we need to do is help address this debt crisis, and also give Puerto Rico and help Puerto Rico to address, you know, kind of this neo-colonialism that has helped cause this crisis, right?
Now we're going to talk about the longer term roots, but in the relatively short period that you've just mentioned, Ed, and you've both talked about, there have been some very specific rules passed for Puerto Rico, right, which have a lot to do with the question of what its options might be. One of them is this 1984 law that made it impossible for Puerto Rico to claim and declare bankruptcy.
Right.
What else is special about the law when it comes to these questions in Puerto Rico?
Well, one policy that the bonds were sold under was a triple tax exemption, which is another thing that made Puerto Rico really attractive to bond buyers. And the fact is that the hedge funds came in, or the vulture funds came in, when Puerto Rico's economy was already distressed. Another similarity is that the bond rating agencies did nothing to really warn people who were making these investments, or, you know, before the vulture funds came in. Now, the bankruptcy law, that was kind of a quirk because of an argument over whether Puerto Rico's status as a territory should allow it to declare bankruptcy. Unfortunately, what's happened is that because the investors knew that Puerto Rico would not be able to declare bankruptcy, that made the bonds more attractive.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And the hedge fund investors and creditors have spent millions and millions of dollars on Washington lobbyists to make sure that bankruptcy is not an option for Puerto Rico. And that's part of the reason why the Puerto Rican people are so concerned about this oversight board, right? Because the same people that, you know, were lobbied in Washington to prevent Puerto Rico from being able to use bankruptcy may be the same people that end up on this board.
And who's appointed the members?
Congress, yes.
So that's the colonial part.
Yes, very much so.
You know, John Oliver got to some of this in a recent report on his program last week tonight. It was really pretty good, and he brought Lin-Manuel Miranda in to make a plea to Congress for help. Here's a clip.
Paul Ryan, I'll come sing Hamilton at your house. I'll do-si-do with Pelosi. I'll wear my Hamilton blouse. Your citizens are suffering. Stop the bleeding. Stop the loss. Help Puerto Rico. It's just 100 miles across.
I thought it was pretty great, but I read your column, Ed, and not so much.
I'm sure it was well-intentioned on both of their parts, but unfortunately they didn't mention the main problem that at least Puerto Ricans on the island see, which is the Fiscal Oversight Board, because they see how it represents a return of colonialism. There's a lot of opposition on the island, really from mainstream politicians to the grassroots and leftist organizations, because it represents control of Puerto Rico's affairs from the outside. And I think it disturbed me a little bit that Miranda was offering to trade tickets for the show to, you know, right-wing Republicans who really don't have the interests of Puerto Rican people.
We should say he's the writer and the star of the hit musical Hamilton on Broadway.
Yeah.
So look, talk about that resistance a little bit. What are hedge clippers, or is hedge clippers?
Sure. So Hedge Clippers is a group, and we came together to expose and inform people about the ways that hedge funds use their money and their power to really drive politics in this country, and to really find ways to build their own power, right? To keep building massive amounts of money, keep building massive amounts of wealth. And we've also taken a deep look at the collateral damage that billionaire-driven politics has on Americans.
And what are you suggesting people do?
I mean, I think the big thing is that we have to hold hedge funds accountable for what they do, right? A lot of hedge funds, they benefit from loopholes that they've worked really, really hard to have, things like the carried interest loophole, and they pay less taxes than teachers and truck drivers and nurses. And because they have all that money, they're able to buy politicians, to get what they want in Puerto Rico, to get what they want in New York, to get what they want often around the globe. And really what we're looking for is to hold hedge funds accountable, to rein them in, and to make sure that we are fighting for a government and an economy that can work for everyone, and not just for the people that know how to crank the gears.
And is hedge clippers only active in Puerto Rico or on Puerto Rican issues?
Sure. No, so we started off in New York, and we've expanded across the country because we know that we know that hedge funds are involved across the globe, and Puerto Ricans are American citizens, and we understood there was a debt crisis, and we understood that hedge funds were playing a huge role. So we wanted to make sure that we were writing about it, that we were taking action to help the Puerto Rican people, and to make sure that people across the globe understand what's going on in Puerto Rico, who's to blame, and why they're doing it.
And you looked in your commentary to the history of Puerto Ricans organizing for themselves for change and for self-determination. Where do you see possibilities there for impact today?
Well, right now there is a commission that's studying the debt, that's doing what they call a forensic audit of the debt, which means that it's not merely an accountant's audit of the debt, like who spends what or who owes what. It's trying to examine the legality of the debt, and they're using this 19th century case called Littlefield versus Ballou as a precedent, which was actually brought up in the Detroit bankruptcy case and saved Detroit, I think, $1.2 billion, which says that if part of the debt is found to be illegal, then it shouldn't be paid. However, one thing that's been pointed out to me is that in the House bill, there's a language in the bill that says the debts must be paid whether they're illegal or not.
That is quite some language.
But a lot of Puerto Ricans are organizing, again, it's interesting how it involves mainstream politicians and grassroots activists about drawing attention to the U.S.'s responsibility in the matter. Particularly, the first instance would be the illegality of this debt.
Yeah.
And I think it's going to be a big rallying cry. I think that even if the bill passes, there's going to be a lot of civil disobedience and protests.
Now, there are models. I mean, I was in Ecuador and I interviewed their finance minister, Pedro Paez, and in that country, that's exactly what they did. They went in and they discovered that at least a third of the debt was illegal, and they just wrote it off.
Yeah, but unfortunately, they have recourse to international courts, and they also have access to international loan systems, but Puerto Rico doesn't. I mean, it can go to international, but it's relatively isolated because it doesn't have sovereign status.
Now, are any of the people on the presidential campaign trail saying the right thing about Puerto Rico?
Well, Bernie Sanders has been most progressive, has called for intervention by the Federal Reserve or executive powers. Hillary Clinton has been less committal, and in fact, two significant Puerto Rican leaders, the mayor of San Juan and an LGBT leader, Pedro Julio Serrano. The mayor of San Juan and Pedro Julio Serrano are both announced that they were withdrawing their support for Hillary Clinton because she did not explicitly denounce the Fiscal Oversight Board.
For sure. And Donald Trump, in true Donald Trump fashion, has been all over the place, right? He came out and he said, he loves debt and he likes bankruptcy for himself, but he doesn't think it's good for Puerto Rico. And then after a pushback from lots of Puerto Rican groups, hedge clippers included, he said that, he thinks that Puerto Rico should be able to restructure his debt. But they've all been talking about it, which is good, because I think, like you said, there hasn't been enough coverage about, what's looking like the next humanitarian crisis. And it's at least good that they're talking about it, and I think there's lots of work to do to make sure that we come out with policies that are going to really help Puerto Rico.
Charles Kahn, Ed Morales, thank you so much, both of you, for coming in.
Thanks for having us.
You can find more information at our website.
The Summer Leadership Institute was created out of a need to learn. It was originally meant as a way to get urban bushwomen to have stronger professional development. And then I thought, well, why should it just be urban bushwomen? Why shouldn't we open it out and learn by having a lot of people in the room and not just yourselves?
Blackbird, blackbird, what you gonna do? What you gonna do when they come for you? Blackbird, blackbird, what you gonna do? What you gonna do when they come for you?
That diversity was a key part of our learning, not to have the room look like, oh, we're a rainbow tribe, but because it was through these diverse perspectives that we could, in fact, we would grow.
Blackbird, blackbird, multiply. Blackbird, blackbird, multiply.
The asset mapping that we do allows people to bring into the room all of the amazing strengths that they have, and that is restabilizing. That does help them come back to their core.
This is that space, that safe space. So we send it love and we send it healing. We celebrate its power, strength, resistance, resilience, freedom. And we nourish it with all of the love, the patience, the joy, the courage, the laughter. We put it all in this space.
Urban Bushwomen is about being whole. Urban Bushwomen's work is deliberate about addressing wholeness. Our culminating performance is a culminating and integration of our learning. It's a way for us to come back together as a community through performance, but it's also a way for us to integrate this knowledge into our bodies, into our hearts, into our minds, into our guts. And it's a restorative practice. So in the ways that yoga has restorative practices, the culminating performance is a restorative practice of the Summer Leadership Institute. It brings us back together to be whole. If you set up the process in a way that is open, inviting, and has structure, but that structure can be fluid when it needs to be, the genius of the group will always emerge. I trust that.
ancient law, contemporary blowback, a chase-the-rich approach to development. It's not just Puerto Rico that is mired in debt and sparing the rich at the expense of the poor. It's also New Haven. That Connecticut city is in a long, drawn-out fight with its very own colonial power, Yale. At issue is an 1834 state law that granted the university a special tax exemption. Because they serve the public good, private colleges, don't forget, are exempt from federal and state taxes, most of them, at the city level under that 1834 law, ostensibly because Yale trained priests for the local community was exempt from paying tax on some commercial properties. Now New Haven is dominated by Yale, a university, as well as a medical complex. Just like in Baltimore, it was Johns Hopkins. What these cities have in common is that manufacturing's declined and universities have expanded, while local officials encourage them, because so-called eds and meds, colleges and hospitals, promise growth and jobs while doing good. They bring in federal and state dollars, and they get tax breaks. But their success doesn't automatically translate into economic or social success for surrounding communities. Yale's budget is already bigger than many countries. Its endowment tops $23 billion. The college and its research complex are now New Haven's largest employer, but they're surrounded by poor and working class neighborhoods where unemployment is rife. Rates for African Americans and Latinos stand at between 18 and 20%. Just about double the rate of the city's white population. Hospital workers mostly earn low part-time wages. They're not members of unions. So what to do? Since taxing real estate and other property is the only form of municipal taxation allowed by state law in Connecticut, New Haven Mayor Tony Harp says that the city really does need to reconsider that 1834 exemption. She's up against the Ivy League and local businesses who've threatened that any change would be a disaster, leading to a loss in jobs, an end to research, and the eviction of the local symphony. Still, Harp and her colleagues are not backing down, and that is in part because they have the support of a community-led coalition of clergy, labor, progressive, and community groups. The economy's changed over 182 years, they say. The law needs to likewise. Watch this space for an anti-colonial movement against colonial corporations in our cities. What do you think?